Welcome back. Module 2, the legal basis of the music business, continues. It's a bit of a marathon, this module, but it's an important marathon, and I hope you're getting a lot of value out of the content. We're not quite done with copyright yet. I want to talk to you about copyright internationally. And the reason we do this is because it's sort of easy to overlook. If you're in America, you're familiar that there's an American Copyright Act. If you're in Australia, if you're in England, it doesn't really matter which country you're in, there is copyright law in that country. Well, that's great. But think about that thing that we love to call the World Wide Web. Your music, whether it's your songs or your recordings, they have the ability to wander all over the world. In fact, in the streaming era, you upload a song to Spotify or Apple Music and your song can be pretty much heard anywhere in the world. Your recording can be streamed pretty much anywhere in the world. Now, so far we've talked about copyright as if it was just a concept, and in a way it is. But that concept is embodied in laws in all the different countries. So why would somebody operating a business in Australia care less what the German Copyright Act says, or the Chinese Copyright Act, or the Colombian Copyright Act? And equally, why would any of the users of music, the consumers of music, or businesses in Colombia or China or Germany care less what the Australian Copyright Act says? They wouldn't. So, if you are a dedicated and switched on artist, you would probably think, all right, well, I need to know about this. But even the most dedicated and switched on artist is not really expected to know what the Chinese Copyright Act says, or the French Copyright Act, or, the South African Copyright Act. It just isn't something that you could be expected to know and understand. So, how do you deal with this? Well, do not fear, international treaties are here. And most of you will recognize that there is international agreements that govern a whole heap of different areas of law. So the first thing you need to understand is that copyright protection does depend on the country that you're in. But the good news is that there is an international cooperation around how those laws are enforced and how copyright is recognized. Now, you might have heard of international contracts, and trust me, if you don't want to be a copyright lawyer, because that sounds too complicated, do not even think about being an international law lawyer, because that will do your head in. It's one of the most complex areas of law. Fortunately, I'm not one of those, and none of you want to be, so I'm going to keep the explanation of how international law works fairly simple and superficial. What I can say is this. All over the world, in different areas, whether it's to do with trade or the environment or whatever it might be, entire countries enter into contracts all the time. They've got some fun names. They could be called a protocol or a pact or a convention or an international agreement. And to be honest, I'm sure all of those different types of international agreements have specific meanings. A protocol is different to a pact, or a pact is different to a convention. I'm not smart enough to know the difference. Fortunately, you don't need to know the difference. But what you do need to understand is that international agreements are enforceable. Just like a contract between you and a manager or you and a record company, those agreements give rights and obligations to the people that enter into the agreement. So if, a bunch of countries enter into a trade agreement, it's legally enforceable. If one country breaches the agreement, if they don't fulfill their terms under that agreement, there are consequences. Just like any other contract, you can breach an international agreement. An entire country can breach a contract. So we have those that relate to copyright. Now, you don't need to know how international agreements work. I mean, if you're interested in trade, if you're interested in politics, if you're interested in the global environment, which we all should be, it's kind of important to recognise that every country has a set of obligations in those areas. However, as a recording artist, as a songwriter, you probably don't need to know the intricacies of international law. But one thing is that know that you're protected. Do not wake up in the middle of the night thinking, hey, I just realised I had a look on my Spotify for artists and I realised my song's getting streamed in some country I've never heard of on the other side of the world. I haven't done anything about copyright in that country. What am I supposed to do? Go back to sleep. It's all right. You're covered. There are international agreements in place. Now, there are two main copyright conventions or agreements that basically cover you when it comes to your creative works, your songs and your recordings. There's lots of others, but the two basic ones that have been around for a very long time are the Berne Convention for the Protection of Literary and Artistic Works, which fortunately most people just refer to as the Berne Convention, which I might add is nothing like the Burning Man Festival. That's a completely different thing. This is the Berne Convention, so no, it's not a bunch of people wearing wacky outfits and dancing around in the desert. Different thing. And the International Copyright Convention. Now, the Berne Convention gives rise to two key principles. And trust me, we are getting near the end of copyright here, so just hang in there a little bit longer and you will be the smartest artist in the room when it comes to copyright knowledge. So just hang in there for these ones. We're almost there. Okay, the principle of national treatment and the principle of automatic protection. And they work like this. The principle of national treatment allows the courts of a country to apply their national law to acts that occur within that country. Now you might think, well, that's fairly obvious. If there's a copyright infringement in Argentina, the Argentinian law should apply to it. Well, it does. That's what this convention says. But it goes further than that. It also says that if your work is infringed in Argentina or France or Germany or Italy or any other country, any country that's a member of the Berne Convention, your work gets the same protection that a work that a national of that country has created. So you get exactly the same protection in Italy as an Italian copyright owner. You get exactly the same protection in the US as a US copyright owner. In Australia, if you're from the US, your song gets the same protection in Australia as a work written or recorded in Melbourne or Sydney. You get exactly the same protection. Now, hopefully, most of you are thinking, well, that seems really logical, that seems fair. There's no reason why there should be second-class copyrights. You know, there's no reason why in England, an Australian song should get lesser protection in England than an English songwriter's song gets. That would make complete sense. But think about some of the other laws. Think about laws relating to immigration and citizenship, for example. If you come to Australia, you as a visitor to Australia, or you as a person on a student visa to Australia, you don't get the same rights as a permanent resident, or you don't get the same rights as a citizen. So this idea of equal rights doesn't apply in every area of the law. So it's actually a big deal that in all of the countries that are members of the Berne Convention, your work gets exactly the same protection as a native work from that country. That's the first principle. The second principle is the principle of automatic protection. Now, under the principle of automatic protection, a work will be granted protection even if it fails to satisfy the formalities of that particular country. So let's say in Iceland. No, I've got an example there already. Yeeland, something to do with Kanye West. He's got his own country now and we've called it Yeeland. So in Yeeland, in order to get copyright protection, you have to do a back somersault within 3 days of creating the work, and that's the only way you get copyright protection in Yeeland. It's a kind of wacky law, but that's the law in Yeeland. Are you supposed to know that? Of course you're not going to know that. And the law says, well, it doesn't matter. The fact that you have automatic copyright protection in Australia or automatic copyright protection in the US, that's sufficient for us. If your work is protected in your country, it doesn't matter that in our strange country of Yeeland, you have this really strange law that says you have to do 3 back somersaults in order to get copyright protection. Doesn't matter. So you put those two things together. The law of automatic protection and the law of national treatment, and you put those two things together and it means that your work is protected in any other country provided it is a copyright work in your country. Now, the good news is that there's around 180 countries that are members of the Berne Convention. And with all due respect to the countries that are not members, they're pretty small and they're not likely to be a big part of your music career. Very small places that are not part of the Berne Convention. So you can all go to bed tonight, whatever time it is in your country when you're watching this lesson, knowing that your copyright is protected in every country. That's one thing you can cross off your things to worry about list. Your copyright work is protected internationally. Good news. All right, thanks very much, and we'll see you in the next lesson.